It started with an innocent flyer. At least, that's what Claire called it. She'd picked it up at a coffee shop, a bright piece of paper advertising a free seminar on unlocking your full potential. When she showed it to me that evening, I barely glanced at it. Sounds like one of those self-help scams, I said, tossing it aside. But Claire's enthusiasm was unshaken. It's free, Mark, she said, her voice tinged with that hopeful tone she used when she wanted me to agree to something. What's the harm? She was always into that sort of thing. Yoga retreats, mindfulness apps, online courses promising to make you more productive or happy. I figured this was just another one of her phases. Sure, I said, shrugging. Go ahead. Just don't let them sell you anything. The first seminar was on a Tuesday night. Claire came home glowing, her cheeks flushed, her eyes brighter than I'd seen in months. It was incredible, she said as she poured herself a glass of wine. The speaker, Damon, I don't even know how to describe him. He just has this way of making you feel like anything is possible. Damon? I asked, raising an eyebrow. She nodded, sitting across from me at the table. Damon Starr. He's the founder of the whole thing. You'd really like him, Mark. He's smart, charismatic. You should come to the next session with me. I laughed, shaking my head. I think I'll pass. Over the next few weeks, Claire became more and more involved with the group. She started attending weekly sessions, then weekend workshops. It's like therapy, she said one evening when I asked why she was going so often. But better. It's not just about talking, it's about action, actually changing your life. I tried to be supportive. If it made her happy, who was I to judge? But as time went on, I couldn't ignore the changes in her. She became more secretive, spending hours on the phone in hushed conversations. She started coming home later and later, always with some excuse about the group running overtime or grabbing drinks with the other members. Then there were the expenses. Charges started appearing on our credit card, retreats, membership fees, even books and merchandise with Damon Starr's name on them. When I brought it up, she waved me off. It's an investment in myself, she said. The breaking point came when she announced she'd be gone for an entire weekend. Damon invited me to a special retreat, she said, her excitement barely contained. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And what exactly happens at this retreat? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She hesitated, avoiding my gaze. It's hard to explain, she said. It's about breaking down barriers, facing your fears, really getting to the core of who you are. Claire, this is starting to sound like a cult, I said bluntly. Her face hardened. It's not a cult, Mark. You don't understand because you haven't been there. If you just come to one session, you'd see how amazing it is. I didn't argue, but the unease in my gut was impossible to ignore. When she left for the retreat that Friday, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. She was almost too eager to go, her goodbye quick and distracted. I tried to focus on other things, but my mind kept drifting back to her and this so-called opportunity. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I opened her laptop, searching for anything that might give me a clearer picture of what she was involved in. Most of it was innocuous, emails about schedules, links to motivational videos. But then I found a folder labeled Star Documents. Inside were PDFs of workshop materials, filled with strange phrases like embrace the star connection and transcend physical boundaries. There were diagrams of energy flows and instructions for partnered exercises that sounded unsettlingly intimate. But what really caught my attention was a photo of Damon Starr himself, standing in front of a room full of people. He was tall, lean, with piercing eyes and an air of authority that practically leapt off the screen. Next to him stood Claire, her face lit up with admiration as she gazed at him. My stomach turned. I scrolled through more photos, each one more alarming than the last. Claire standing arm in arm with other members, all dressed in white. Claire laughing with Damon at what looked like a private dinner. And then, buried at the bottom of the folder, a picture of Damon and Claire sitting alone in a dimly lit room, their heads close together. That was when the doubt turned into certainty. This wasn't just some self-help group. And whatever was happening between Claire and Damon, it wasn't innocent. I closed the laptop, my hands clenched into fists. When Claire came back from the retreat on Sunday night, she was practically glowing. It was amazing, she said, dropping her bag by the door. Life-changing. I didn't respond. What's wrong? She asked, her smile faltering. Nothing, I said flatly, walking past her. But I knew it wasn't nothing, and I knew I wasn't going to let it slide. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen on Claire's laptop. The photos of her and Damon, the strange workshop materials. It was all too much to ignore. But every time I tried to bring it up, she shut me down. You're overthinking it, she'd say, or, I wish you'd just trust me. Trust. That word gnawed at me. How could I trust her when she was hiding so much? Claire had always been a private person, but this was different. The secrecy, the evasiveness. It didn't feel like her. Or maybe it was her, and I was only just realizing how much I didn't know about the woman I'd married. One night, as she slept beside me, I reached for her phone. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the screen. This was a line I'd never crossed before. But the memory of her sitting with Damon in that dimly lit room, their heads close together, pushed me over the edge. I unlocked the phone and scrolled through her messages, feeling a strange mix of guilt and determination. At first, it seemed innocent enough. Messages with friends, reminders from the school about parent-teacher night, a few texts from her sister. But then I found the thread with Damon. The texts weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. The intimacy between them was obvious. Damon, you're so close to breaking through. I can feel it. This weekend will be transformative. Claire, I hope so. You make me feel things I've never felt before. Damon, it's only the beginning. The universe has so much more in store for us. I stared at the screen, the words burning into my brain. Feel things I've never felt before. My stomach turned. I set the phone down, my throat tight and my mind racing. It wasn't just emotional. She was drawn to him in a way she hadn't been to me in years. The next morning, I couldn't hide my tension. Claire noticed almost immediately. Are you okay? She asked as we sat down for breakfast. Fine, I said curtly, avoiding her eyes. She frowned but didn't press the issue. Instead, she launched into a monologue about an upcoming event Damon was hosting, a weekend retreat at some remote location. It's supposed to be the ultimate breakthrough experience, she said, her voice tinged with excitement. Damon says it's where everything comes together. And what exactly does that mean? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Claire paused, her fork hovering over her plate. It's hard to explain, she said carefully. It's about breaking down barriers, facing your fears, really getting to the core of who you are. Sounds like a cult, I muttered under my breath. She bristled. It's not a cult, Mark. You don't understand because you haven't been there. If you just come to one session, you'd see how amazing it is. I didn't argue, but the unease in my gut was impossible to ignore. When she left for the retreat that Friday, she was practically glowing. I'll be back Sunday evening, she said, leaning in to kiss me goodbye. Her kiss felt hollow, like a gesture made out of habit rather than affection. As I watched her car disappear down the street, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit idly by while Claire slipped further into Damon's grasp. I grabbed my keys and followed her, keeping a safe distance as her car wound through the city. She drove for nearly an hour, heading out of town to a secluded area surrounded by woods. The road was barely more than a dirt path, and when she finally turned into a clearing, I parked my car out of sight and continued on foot. The clearing opened up to a large cabin, its rustic exterior at odds with the sleek cars parked outside. A discreet sign near the door read, Star Connection, Members Only. I crouched behind a row of bushes, watching as Claire walked inside. I waited for a few minutes, then circled around the building, looking for another way in. Around the back, I found a window slightly ajar. I pulled myself up and peered inside, my breath catching at what I saw. The room was dimly lit, with candles lining the walls and casting flickering shadows. About a dozen people stood in a circle, all dressed in white, their heads bowed. Damon stood at the center, his hands outstretched as he spoke. Claire was directly in front of him, her face upturned, her expression one of rapt adoration. Tonight, we shed the barriers that hold us back, Damon said, his voice low and magnetic. Tonight, we embrace the energy that binds us, the connection that transcends time and space. The group murmured in agreement, their voices blending into a strange, almost hypnotic chant. Damon stepped closer to Claire, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "You are ready," he said, his voice softer now. "You've always been ready." Claire nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. I couldn't watch anymore. Slipping away from the window, I stumbled back to my car, my mind racing. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a seminar. It was something darker, something that had completely taken hold of Claire. And Damon, he wasn't just some self-help guru. He was controlling her, manipulating her in ways I couldn't fully understand. When Claire came home Sunday evening, she was glowing again, the same euphoric look on her face that had become so familiar. "How was it?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Life-changing," she said, smiling as she poured herself a glass of water. "You really should come sometime, Mark. You'd love it." I forced a smile, nodding. "Maybe I will." But I had no intention of joining her. I was done sitting on the sidelines. If I wanted to protect Claire and our family, I needed to take action. Whatever Damon Starr was doing, whatever hold he had on her, I was going to break it. Claire's behavior became more erratic after the retreat. She was still glowing, still full of that strange energy, but there was something else, an edge of nervousness, like she was carrying a secret she didn't want me to see. She spent more time in our room with the door closed, her voice low and urgent whenever she took a call. If I walked by, the conversation would stop abruptly, followed by the unmistakable sound of her hanging up. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever was happening between Claire and Damon wasn't just about self-improvement or enlightenment. It was bigger than that, and I was determined to figure out exactly what it was. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, Claire left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she ran upstairs to grab something. I hesitated, glancing toward the stairs to make sure she was out of sight, before sitting down and opening her browser history. Most of it was what I expected: emails, online banking, social media, but one entry caught my eye. A file-sharing site. Clicking on the link brought me to a folder titled Star Ascension Members. The contents made my blood run cold. There were photos, dozens of them, of Claire and Damon together. Some were innocent enough, showing her standing with other members of the group during workshops or dinners. But others were more intimate. Claire sitting close to Damon, their hands almost touching. Damon leaning in to whisper something in her ear while she smiled up at him. And then, near the bottom of the folder, a photo that left no doubt about what was going on. Damon with his arm around Claire's waist, his hand resting just a little too low. But it wasn't just the photos. There were documents, too. Spreadsheets listing members' names alongside large dollar amounts. Bank statements showing transfers to accounts linked to Damon and the group. And then there was a recording, an audio file labeled Private Session, Claire and Damon. I clicked on it, my heart pounding. At first, it was just their voices, calm and conversational. Damon was asking Claire about her fears, her goals, the barriers she wanted to overcome. But then the tone shifted. "You're so close to breaking through," Damon said, his voice low and smooth. "I can feel it. But you have to let go, Claire. You have to trust me completely." "I do trust you," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then prove it," he said. The recording ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the screen in stunned silence. "Mark." Claire's voice jolted me out of my thoughts. She was standing in the doorway, her expression wary. "What are you doing?" I quickly closed the browser, my mind racing for an excuse. "Just checking something," I said, my voice as casual as I could make it. She didn't look convinced. "You're acting strange," she said, stepping closer. "Is everything okay?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said, standing up. "You've been keeping a lot of secrets lately, Claire. Do you want to tell me what's really going on?" Her eyes flickered with something. Guilt, maybe, or fear. But she recovered quickly, crossing her arms and giving me a defiant look. "You're imagining things," she said. "I don't know what you're talking about." I didn't press her. Not yet. But as she walked away, I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. That night, After Claire had gone to bed, I reached out to Jake. He was the only person I trusted to help me figure this out. When I told him everything, he didn't laugh or call me paranoid. He just listened, his expression growing darker with every word. "You need to get ahead of this," he said when I finished. "Whatever this guy is doing, it's not just about Claire. He's running some kind of scam, and if she's involved, it could ruin both of you." "I don't care about me," I said. "I just want her out of it." Jake nodded. "Then we need proof. Something concrete." He called a friend of his, a tech guy who specialized in digging up dirt on people. Within an hour, we were sitting in Jake's living room, watching as his friend hacked into Damon's public accounts. "He's careful," the guy said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Most of his stuff is encrypted, but there are a few breadcrumbs, social media posts, public records. Did you know he's been sued 3 times in the last 5 years? For what?" I asked, leaning forward. "Fraud," the guy said. "He settles out of court every time. And get this, his real name isn't even Damon Starr. It's Dennis Harper." "Dennis?" Jake said, snorting. "Not exactly the name of a spiritual guru." The guy smirked. "Yeah, well, Dennis has a long history of reinventing himself. He's run at least 3 different organizations under different names. They all fold after a few years, but not before he cleans out his members' bank accounts." As he spoke, he pulled up a list of addresses linked to Damon. One of them was the retreat location Claire had just visited. "You should go there," Jake said. "See what you can find." The thought of confronting Damon sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, but I knew Jake was right. If I wanted to save Claire, I needed to see what was really going on. The next day, while Claire was out, I drove to the retreat. The place was just as I remembered, secluded, quiet, and eerily calm. I parked a short distance away and approached on foot, keeping to the trees for cover. When I reached the building, I peered through one of the windows, my heart hammering in my chest. Inside, I saw Damon standing in front of a group of people, his voice calm and authoritative as he spoke. Claire was there, sitting near the front, her eyes fixed on him with a look of pure devotion. As I watched, Damon stepped closer to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. She smiled up at him, her expression filled with trust and something that looked a lot like longing. I clenched my fists, anger boiling inside me. This wasn't just about money or manipulation anymore. It was personal. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, hidden in the shadows outside the retreat, watching Damon weave his web of lies. Inside, Claire hung on his every word, her gaze locked on him like he was the answer to every question she'd ever had. The way she smiled at him, the way her body leaned forward slightly, it was a language I couldn't ignore. It was intimacy, trust, devotion, and it wasn't meant for me anymore. Damon stepped closer to her, his hand brushing lightly against her shoulder as he spoke. She laughed softly, tilting her head to the side as if no one else in the room mattered. My chest tightened. Whatever had drawn Claire to this man, whatever hold he had on her, it was stronger than I'd realized. I needed to get closer. Keeping to the trees, I crept around to the back of the building, where a side door stood slightly ajar. It led to a hallway lined with closed doors, their polished wooden surfaces reflecting the dim light of wall sconces. I moved silently, ears straining for any sound that might give me a clue about what was happening. Voices drifted down the hall from one of the larger rooms. I followed the sound, stopping just before the entrance. Peering through the narrow gap in the partially closed door, I saw Damon standing at the center of the group, his arms spread wide as he spoke. "Our connections define us," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "And when we embrace those connections fully, when we let go of fear and doubt, we become something greater." The group murmured in agreement, their voices blending into a low hum. Damon turned to Claire, his expression softening. "You've taken such brave steps," he said, his tone intimate. "You've opened yourself to the possibilities of the universe in ways most people never will." Claire smiled, her cheeks flushing. "It's because of you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You've shown me what's possible." "I've only shown you the path," Damon replied, stepping closer. "You've done the rest." Their closeness made my skin crawl. It wasn't just admiration. It was something deeper, something that crossed the line of professionalism or even friendship. I clenched my fists, barely resisting the urge to burst into the room and confront them both. Before I could make a decision, Damon gestured toward the doors lining the hallway. "Tonight, we will continue our journey in smaller groups," he said. "Find your partners, embrace the energy between you, and let the universe guide you." The group began to disperse, pairing off and moving toward the individual rooms. Claire lingered for a moment, looking at Damon expectantly. He nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and she followed him down the hall. I waited until they disappeared into one of the rooms before creeping closer. The door didn't close all the way, leaving a narrow gap that gave me a clear view inside. The room was dimly lit, with candles flickering on a low table in the center. Damon sat across from Claire, his posture relaxed but commanding. "You've made so much progress," he said, his voice low and soothing. "But there's still more to uncover." Claire nodded, her hands folded nervously in her lap. "I want to let go completely," she said. "I want to break free of everything holding me back." "Then trust me," Damon said, leaning forward. "Let me guide you." Claire hesitated for a moment before reaching out to take his hands. Their fingers intertwined, and Damon smiled, a look of satisfaction crossing his face. I couldn't watch anymore. The rage bubbling inside me threatened to boil over, and I knew if I stayed any longer, I'd do something I couldn't take back. I stormed back to my car, my mind racing. This wasn't just about Claire anymore. Damon was a manipulator, preying on vulnerable people and twisting them to his will. If I wanted to stop him, I needed more than just my anger. I needed proof. The next morning, I met with Jake and Vic, the investigator Jake had introduced me to. I laid out everything I'd seen and told them about the documents I'd found on Claire's laptop. Vic listened carefully, his sharp eyes narrowing as I spoke. "He's got a pattern," Vic said when I finished. "Targeting people like your wife, intelligent, ambitious, but maybe feeling a little lost. He builds trust, draws them in, and uses that connection to bleed them dry." "Can you prove it?" I asked. Vic nodded. "I've been looking into him since you first brought him up. He's careful, but not invincible. If he's funneling money through this group, there'll be a paper trail. And if he's crossing personal lines with members," he trailed off, a smirk playing on his lips. "Let's just say I've got a few ideas." We spent hours poring over everything Vic had gathered, bank statements, emails, even testimonials from former members who'd left the group and described Damon's manipulative tactics. The picture was clear. Damon wasn't just a self-help guru. He was a con artist, and Claire had become one of his marks. "We need to confront him," I said finally. "Expose him for what he is." Jake nodded. "And Claire? What about her?" I hesitated. I didn't know the answer to that yet. All I knew was that I couldn't let Damon get away with what he'd done. To Claire, to me, to all the other people he'd manipulated. The plan was simple enough. Catch Damon in the act. Vic had managed to dig up everything we needed to corner him: financial records, complaints from former members, and even a few incriminating videos from his past seminars. But we needed more. We needed undeniable proof that he was manipulating Claire and others for his personal gain. Claire had another retreat planned for the weekend, which gave us the perfect opportunity. Vic pulled a few strings to get me a spot on the guest list, posing as a new member curious about unlocking my potential. It wasn't difficult. Damon's group thrived on bringing in fresh faces, and I was more than willing to play the part. When Friday came, I dressed the part, simple white clothing, as instructed in the email, and arrived at the retreat location. It was as eerie as I remembered. The secluded cabin nestled in the woods, its flickering candlelight visible through the windows. Claire's car was already there, parked near the entrance. I checked in with a woman at the front desk who introduced herself as Celeste, one of Damon's assistants. She handed me a folder of materials and a name tag with my first name scrawled in delicate handwriting. "Welcome," she said with a serene smile. "This weekend is about transformation. Let Damon guide you." Inside, the main room was set up for the opening session. A circle of chairs surrounded a single, ornate candle stand, its flames flickering as if alive. Damon stood at the center, speaking with Claire. She laughed at something he said, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in years. My stomach churned. Damon's gaze swept the room, landing on me. His expression didn't falter, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes as he approached. "Mark, is it?" he said, extending his hand. "Yes," I replied, forcing a smile as I shook it. His grip was firm, confident, almost overbearing. "It's always good to see a new face," he said, his voice warm but calculated. "What brought you here?" "Curiosity," I lied. "Claire's told me a lot about what you do. I wanted to see it for myself." His smile widened, but there was something predatory about it. "I'm glad you did. Transformation begins with an open mind." The session began with Damon's usual theatrics, his deep, resonant voice weaving stories of overcoming fear and embracing the universal connection. The group hung on his every word, nodding and murmuring in agreement. Claire sat near the front, her posture relaxed, her gaze fixed on him. I played along, clapping when the others clapped, nodding when Damon made one of his profound statements. But my focus wasn't on his words, it was on Claire, on the way she seemed completely under his spell. As the evening went on, Damon announced that the group would break off into smaller sessions for one-on-one work. He paired the members himself, deliberately matching people based on what he called their energy alignment. When he got to Claire, he hesitated, his gaze lingering on her. "You'll stay with me," he said softly. She nodded, her cheeks flushing as she followed him out of the room. My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was what I needed, to see how far he was willing to go. I waited a few minutes before slipping out of the room and following them down the hall. They entered one of the private rooms, leaving the door slightly ajar. I crept closer, staying just out of sight, and peered through the gap. The room was dimly lit, candles flickering on every surface. Damon sat across from Claire, his posture relaxed, his voice low and soothing. "You've come so far," he said, "but there's still more to uncover, more to let go of." Claire nodded, her voice trembling as she replied, "I want to let go completely. I want to be free." "Then trust me," Damon said, leaning forward. "Let me guide you." She hesitated, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I do trust you," she said finally. Damon reached out, taking her hands in his. "Then let's take the next step together." That was enough. I stepped into the room, my voice cutting through the quiet. "Is this what you call guidance, Damon?" They both froze, Claire's face turning pale as she yanked her hands away from his. Damon recovered quickly, standing and spreading his arms as if to welcome me. "Mark," he said smoothly, "this isn't what it looks like." "Don't insult my intelligence," I snapped. "I've seen enough to know exactly what's going on here." Claire stood, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Mark, I can explain." "Explain what?" I said, my anger boiling over. "That you've been letting this fraud manipulate you? That you've been lying to me for months?" Damon stepped between us, his calm demeanor finally cracking. "This isn't the place for this kind of confrontation," he said. "If you want to talk, we can do it privately." "No," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. "We're doing this now, and I've got all the proof I need to take you down." I played the audio recording Vic had given me, Damon's voice filling the room with his incriminating words. Claire's eyes widened as the truth sank in, her gaze darting between me and Damon. "This is over," I said, my voice steady. "You're not manipulating anyone else. And Claire, you're coming home with me." Damon's face twisted in anger, but he didn't move. Claire hesitated, her expression torn, before finally nodding. "Okay," she whispered. As we left the room, I felt a mix of relief and anger. This wasn't the end, not yet, but it was the first step toward taking back control. The drive home was quiet, the tension between Claire and me so thick it felt like the car might stall under its weight. She sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Every now and then, she'd glance at me, as if trying to gauge my mood, but I kept my focus on the road. I wasn't ready to speak. Not yet. When we finally pulled into the driveway, Claire let out a shaky breath. "Mark," she said softly, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Not now," I said, my voice firm. We'll talk inside. She nodded and followed me into the house, her footsteps hesitant, like she was walking toward her own execution. I dropped my keys on the counter and turned to face her, crossing my arms. Start talking, I said. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she said. At first, it was just about the group, the workshops, the connection. Damon made me feel seen, like he understood me in a way no one else did. Don't give me that, I snapped. I saw the way you looked at him. This wasn't just about connection. She flinched, her tears spilling over. You're right, she admitted. It wasn't. I let it go too far. I let him manipulate me. But I swear, Mark, I didn't realize what he was doing, how he was using me, until tonight. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You expect me to believe that? After everything I've seen, everything you've hidden from me? Claire took a step closer, her voice trembling. I know I've hurt you. I know I've broken your trust. But I want to make this right. Please, Mark, let me make this right. I wanted to believe her. Part of me still loved her, still wanted to believe that the woman I married was somewhere beneath the mess Damon had created. But the anger, the betrayal, it was too raw, too overwhelming. Making it right starts with telling me everything, I said. No more lies, no more secrets. I want to know everything Damon did, everything you did with him. She hesitated, wiping her tears away. He made me feel important, she said quietly. He said I had potential, that I could be more than just a wife and a mother. He promised to help me find my purpose. And I believed him. And the money? I asked. Claire looked down at her hands. He convinced me to transfer some of Frank's inheritance into the group's accounts. He said it was an investment, that it would help the group grow and benefit everyone involved. I didn't realize how much he was taking for himself until it was too late. Too late? I repeated, my voice rising. You handed over our future to a con artist, and now you're telling me it's too late? Claire nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Mark. I was stupid, and I let him manipulate me. But I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I'll help you get the money back. I'll cut ties with the group. Just, please don't give up on me. I stared at her, my emotions warring inside me. Part of me wanted to yell, to throw her betrayal back in her face. But another part of me, smaller, quieter, wanted to believe she could change. I'll think about it, I said finally, my voice cold. But right now I need space. You can stay here for the kids, but don't expect me to forgive you overnight. Claire nodded, her expression a mix of relief and guilt. Thank you, she whispered. The next few weeks were a blur of legal battles and police investigations. With the evidence Vic and I had gathered, Damon's operation was dismantled piece by piece. Members of the group came forward with their own stories, painting a picture of manipulation, fraud, and emotional abuse. Damon was arrested on charges of embezzlement and fraud, and the group's assets were frozen. Claire cooperated fully with the investigation, providing information that helped the authorities build their case. She stayed out of prison, but was required to pay restitution for her role in transferring Frank's inheritance. As for us, things were complicated. I couldn't bring myself to trust her completely, but I also couldn't ignore the effort she was putting into rebuilding our relationship. She started therapy, both individually and with me, and slowly, painfully, we began to piece things back together. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, Claire reached over and took my hand. I know it's going to take time, she said softly, but I'm not giving up on us. I nodded, squeezing her hand gently. Neither am I. The road ahead wasn't clear, and I didn't know if we'd ever get back to where we once were. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something like hope.